Hey, thanks everyone for coming out today. I wasn't sure what crowd size we would have, but this is a fantastic turnout, and we're really excited to have you here today. Camp Randall, from Civil War to on Wisconsin. Step back in time to explore the 175-year history of one of Wisconsin's most iconic landmarks. This presentation traces Camp Randall's remarkable evolution from Civil War training ground for 70,000 Union soldiers to its transformation into legendary Big Ten Stadium. Our presenter today spent more than 3 decades on the front lines of real-life forensic investigation. He served with the Wisconsin Crime Lab in Madison for 34 years, ultimately retiring as the head of the Drug Identification Unit. Over the course of his distinguished career, he has stepped into the courtroom drama as an expert witness 500 times. He is a neighbor of ours from right down the road in Oregon, an active member of the Oregon Area Historical Society, and a true expert on bringing the truth to light. Please give a warm welcome, Bob Block.
Well, welcome to today's presentation. We're going to talk about Camp Randall and its history. As Dave mentioned, I worked at the crime laboratory for 34 years as a forensic analyst. If you weren't here for that presentation, you might want to try and find that one at some other location. It's a very interesting one, and you get to do some CSI work with me in that presentation. Before we get started, though, on Camp Randall, I want to introduce to you a brand new presentation that I just put together. And just a quick show of hands, how many people have either been to Yerkes Observatory or know about Yerkes Observatory? Okay, a number of you. This presentation will tell you about the University of Chicago takes ownership of the Yerkes Observatory in October of 1897. And it is located in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, overlooking Geneva Lake. If you're not familiar with Williams Bay, it's the next door neighbor to Lake Geneva. This observatory will have what is called the Great Refractor Telescope with a 40-inch lens, which is the largest in the world in 1897, and still the largest telescope today, as they never made another one larger than this. And when we talk about an observatory, of course, it has to have a telescope. But this isn't your typical telescope you might have in your house or your backyard to gaze at the stars. This telescope is 64 feet long and weighs 12,000 pounds. This observatory is known for its famous astronomers who did their research or graduate studies here at the Yerkes Observatory, such as Warren Hubble, which we know is named the Hubble Telescope, and Mary Grace Roman, who is the first director of astronomy for NASA, and she is known as the mother of Hubble, as she is the one who develops and progresses this establishment and the launching of the Hubble Telescope. And Carl Sagan, and we all know him. He's the astronomer who has the famous TV show on PBS called Cosmos, watched by more people in the world than any other PBS show, with over 560 million viewers. This observatory is called the Yerkes Observatory because the businessman financier who provides the fundings for this observatory was Charles Tyson Yerkes from Chicago, a true scandalous character. He's involved in scandals, multiple divorces, embezzlement, larceny, political influence and bribery. Truly a scandalous individual, but he provides the funding for this observatory. It's an amazing place to see. It's known throughout the world and is considered to be the birthplace of modern astrophysics. And it's considered to be one of the most significant historical sites in global science. It has it's a fantastic place to visit, and it has this magical feeling to it. And I'll bring it to you, and you'll be able to see not only this artistic building in terms of its architectural structure and function, but we'll also tour the outside. We'll see the inside. We'll take a background tour of this observatory. And I think you'll really enjoy it, especially if you have any interest in astronomy. I knew nothing about astronomy. All I know is there are stars, planets, and a moon. That's about my knowledge of astronomy. But after my tour, you just have this magical feeling of this building, and we have the privilege of having it right here in our backyard. So hopefully we'll be able to come back and do this presentation for you sometime, maybe this fall. But now let's talk about another historical place, Camp Randall. And if we're going to talk about Camp Randall, we have to go all the way back to 1836. In 1836, Wisconsin is part of a territory. And this territory would consist of today's states of Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and parts of North and South Dakota. And they will hold their first legislative session at the territorial capital in Belmont, Wisconsin, in 1836. The governor of that territory is Henry Dodge. And they will hold this legislative session for a period of 46 days. And this will be the only time that they will meet in this location, in this territorial capital, in 1836. One of those representatives at this session is James Doty. James Doty will buy 1,360 acres of land located between Lake Monona and Lake Mendota. And he will call this land Madison after our fourth U.S. President, James Madison. The very first residents in this land will arrive in 1837, Eben and Rosalind Peck. On May 20, James Doty now owns this land in Madison, and he wants to have the territorial capital moved from Belmont to Madison. And he goes about a kind of a sneaky way of doing so, and he will offer free land to other representatives so that they will join him and support him in moving the territorial capital from Belmont to Madison. And indeed they do. The territorial capital is then moved in 1838 to Madison. On May 29th of 1848, Wisconsin becomes the 30th state of the Union, and Madison is recognized as the capital of the state. When it becomes a state, they will write a state constitution. And in that state constitution, it will say they must name a city to be the home of the University of Wisconsin. And they will name Madison as that city. And we'll then have the establishment of the University of Wisconsin in 1848. Wisconsin has actually had a number of capitals. The very first one would be the territorial capital from 1836 to 1838. Then they will begin to build a second capital, which is from 1838 to 1863. And this would be the start of after we have become a state. And notice it takes a fair long time to build this capital because they build it in stages. And then They'll build a third capital, again beginning in 1857. It'll take them till 1869 to build this capital. And it'll take them until 1882 to fully expand this building to the complete building of this capital. And then, on February 27th of 1904, this capital will burn down, just days after the insurance had expired. Typical state government, either they ran out of money or somebody forgot to pay the bill. At this point now, they will have discussions and even arguments about where should the capital be located. And there's consideration of moving it to Milwaukee instead of Madison. But again, the way government typically works, they will argue on this over and over, and no change will be made. And they will now build a new capital. And they will build that from 1906 to 1917. Again, it takes a fair amount of time to get this capital built. If you look at the diagrams, you can see the one at the top of the capital when it burns down, and you can see today's capital, that it looks pretty much like they simply took the same original plans and simply rebuilt it to look like the original one. And this is our capital that we use today. They use a Beaux Arts design, and Beaux Arts means that it has symmetry, it has columns, it has grand architects and size, and the Capitol certainly fits that style. And it is the tallest building in Madison, Wisconsin. Now remember, James Doty bought this land back in 1836, 1,300 acres or so. And I just found this picture the other day. This is James Doty's property today. So now we are looking some 150 years or so from the time of James Doty when he bought this, and you can see how it has changed over that time. It's kind of a neat picture because now when you look at this picture, you can actually see just how narrow that isthmus is between Lake Minota and Lake Mendota. Well, there was an estate to the west of the Capitol called the Bruin Estate in the 1850s. And he will loan a portion of this land to the State Agriculture Society. And they will use this land for ag fairs, agriculture fairs, and state fairs. When we talk about state fairs, the very first state fair in Wisconsin was in 1851 in Janesville on the shores of the Rock River. And then they will rotate that location throughout the years until they finally established a permanent state fair in 1892 in West Allis, which is still there today. In 1861, we now have the beginning of the Civil War, and the State Agriculture Society will lend this land to the military for military purposes. The then acting governor will begin to muster the troops on these grounds in preparation to send them off to fight in the Civil War. And that governor was Alexander Randall. And this land will be named after him and be called Camp Randall. This site will consist of 53 acres. It will have 40 barracks and a hospital. This is the major training ground for the Union soldiers in Wisconsin, but there are also 3 other campsites, military campsites in Milwaukee that will train the additional Union soldiers in Wisconsin. The Civil War is fought from 1861 to 1865. Wisconsin will send over 91,000 soldiers to fight the Civil War. 70,000 of those 91 will train at Camp Randall. Wisconsin will have 12,300 soldiers die in the Civil War. Somewhere around 3,800 by action or wounds, and another 8,500 or so by illness and disease. such as typhoid fever and the mumps and chickenpox, measles. The very first Union soldier from Wisconsin killed is David Drake from Milwaukee, and he's killed on July 2nd of 1861 at Falling Waters, Virginia. And 31 UW students who will join the Union Army will be killed during the Civil War. Camp Randall will have house 1,200 Confederate POWs during the Civil War. And these are POWs that are captured at what is called the Battle of Island Number 10. Island Number 10 is an island in the Mississippi River. And this is the location that the Confederates are going to defend access to the South by the Union forces. The Confederates will have some 6,000 soldiers there to defend the island and this territory. The Union will send 25,000 Union soldiers. They'll battle for 23 days. The Confederates will win. The Confederates will lose this battle, and the Union will capture some 4,500 Confederate POWs. Most of those will go to St. Louis, but 1,200 of them will come to Camp Randall. The first batch will arrive on April 9th of 1862 of 881 Confederate rebel POWs. The remaining will appear on April 25th of 1862, and they will arrive by boat as these are too injured or ill to march. When they arrive, they're wounded, they're ill, they're filthy, weak, in a state of disrepair. And they're a great curiosity to the residents of Madison because they've never seen a Confederate soldier before. And they will visit with these Confederate soldiers, and they'll provide them with food, clothing, and of course, alcohol to drink. This is not meant to be a POW camp. There is no fence around this camp. There are no stockades. The only thing we have are armed guards. By April 28th, 10 of these Confederate POWs had died, and more will die daily until a total of 140 have died. They now realize that this facility is not adequate to handle POWs. It doesn't have the security or the medical means to provide for the care of this many POWs. And by the end of May, they will have moved these Confederate POWs from Camp Randall to Camp Douglas north of Chicago. And Camp Randall will never again be used as a POW location. We have a cemetery in Madison called Forest Hill Cemetery. It's located on the west side of Madison. It was established in 1857, consists of 140 acres. If you're familiar with where Madison West High School is located, Forest Hills is just to the west of the high school. It is at this cemetery in section 34 that our dead Union soldiers are buried in what is called Soldiers' Rest. If you look at the screen to the left and you see those markers in the front, this is where 240 known Civil War soldiers are interned. And if you look into the background there, you see an obelisk standing, and you'll see more markers behind that. These are the markers of 339 unknown Civil War soldiers that died during the war. Well, what about those Confederate soldiers that died at Camp Randall? They're also buried at Forest Hill in what is called Confederate Rest Cemetery. 110 of these POWs that died were part of the 110th Alabama Infantry. The other soldiers came from Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee. And this is the most northern Confederate cemetery in the entire United States. Much of the Civil War was fought somewhere south of Illinois, Pennsylvania, and so forth. And there are no other cemeteries further north than the one right here in Madison, Wisconsin. You see in the photo here the monument at Confederate Rest, listing the name of all of those POWs that died at Camp Randall. During the uproar of the 2019, when nothing that represents the South or the Confederate was allowed to stand, they were torn down or removed. The same will happen here. This monument will be removed from Confederate Rest. The State Historical Society put this into storage, and the reason they kept it and the significance of this monument was the funds that were raised to create this monument and list the name of these POWs that died at Camp Randall. Much of that money was raised by veteran Union soldiers and their families. Perhaps someday, when things maybe get adjusted and corrected, this monument will be put back where it belongs. When we talk about the Confederate Rest Cemetery, we have to talk about Alice Waterman. Once these Confederate soldiers were buried at Forest Hill in Confederate Rest, it was pretty much ignored. It becomes overgrown. The wood markers begin to decompose and fall apart. Alice Waterman was born in the South, but she will spend much of her life in the North, including Madison, Wisconsin. And she will take on the task of being the caregiver of these grounds. She'll clean up the brush and the overgrowth. She'll put a fence around the cemetery. She'll replace those wooden markers with concrete markers. She'll die in 1897, and her request is to be buried with her boys in Confederate Cemetery. And indeed, she is located, or her body is located in Confederate Rest. And you can see in the bottom right-hand corner her marker in Confederate Rest Cemetery. Jefferson Davis is the president of the Confederate and Confederate States, and the Michigan 4th Cavalry Regiment and the Wisconsin 1st Cavalry Regiment will capture an escaping Jefferson Davis, kind of halfway between Atlanta and the coast, and they will take him into custody. And he's captured on May 9th of 1865 near Irwinville, Georgia. He will be charged with treason, and he will be put into prison, where he will remain for 2 years. He'll be released in May of 1867 on bail, and much of his money is raised by supporters from Union states. He'll go to trial on April 15th of 1869 for treason, but before the trial even begins, the prosecutor will drop the charges. They use some legal term I don't understand, but basically they are simply going to drop the charges, and he will no longer stand trial. Prior to this, President Andrew Johnson had granted pardons to 37 charged with treason, and because of that, and the timeline and how things have changed, the charges are dropped against Jefferson Davis. Likewise, General Lee is also charged with treason, and he is also pardoned by President Johnson. It's kind of an interesting story related to the Civil War and this time period. James Bolin, you see him here, he was a private in the Union Army. Helen Viola Jackson is his caretaker, watching over him and taking care of his needs and his means. On February 4th of 1936, James Bolin, at the age of 90, will marry Helen Jackson, who is 17 years old. Now, that wasn't unusual for that time period. And the reason they would do these veterans would marry these young women with a promise that they, upon their death, they would receive their military pension. This is a time of recession. There's little work opportunity and little money to be made. But when she marries James Boland, she doesn't tell anybody that she's married to him. She still retains her name, and she still lives at home with her parents and continues to be the caretaker of James Boland. He will die 3 years later at the age of 93. And Helen still will not tell anybody that she has been married to James Boland. She will never receive his pension. She will never apply for his pension. Now, as she begins to reach the age of 90 herself, she begins to get recognition that she may be the very last widow of the Civil War. And she likes this attention, and she now admits that indeed she had been married to James Boland. And she dies on December 16th of 2020 at the age of 101, the last widow of the Civil War, and our last human connection to the Civil War. Well, Camp Randall is again used during World War I and World War II. In World War I, it will serve as a training and deployment center. World War I is fought from 1914 to 1918, and you notice that if you look at the photo, it's kind of hard to see, but we're still using horse and wagons for the military during World War I. Again, it is used in World War II. It will serve as a training and housing ground. The WAVs, the women accepted for volunteer emergency service, will be trained here as radio operators for the Navy. You can see them actually marching into Camp Randall here, either during a game or for some ceremony or recognition. And you'll notice around the stadium are a number of 190 mobile trailer homes that are brought in to house these veterans as they are trained at Camp Randall. Well, following the war, in 1865, this land goes back to the Wisconsin Agriculture Society again, and it will be used for many events, including state fairs, which will be held here in 1887 to 1880 and 1883 to 1885. Madison is undergoing a rapid urban expansion, and this land that we call Camp Randall draws much interest in terms of either expanding and using it for residential or commercial space. But the veterans of the Union Army, they are called the Grand Army of the Republic, they do not want this land to be developed, and they want it to remain as Camp Randall. And so the state will purchase this land in 1893 for a cost of $25,000, and they'll immediately deed it to the University of Wisconsin, and it will become the grounds of their athletic activities and training, beginning with track and field. In 1895, the football team and the baseball team will move their practice facilities to these grounds. There's a monument and a park in this area called Camp Randall Park. And again, the Grand Army of the Republic veterans want this park to be established as a memorial to those Union soldiers who fought for Wisconsin in the Civil War. The state will purchase these grounds in 1911. It will consist of 5 acres, and they'll build this arch that you see here. They'll build this arch and dedicate it in June 19th of 1912. It stands 36 feet high and 36 feet wide. And they will purchase the park and build this monument for a cost of $25,000. And this monument is built in recognition of those Union soldiers who fought in the Civil War. If you look at the photo, it might be difficult for you to see. There are two soldiers at the base of this monument. The one on the left is a young soldier preparing to march off to war. The one on the right is a veteran soldier returning from the war. At the very top, you can see the bald eagle, Old Abe. Old Abe was the mascot that marched with the 8th Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry Regiment, and he'll march with them into 30 battles. He will eventually die, and he dies on March 26th of 1861. His body is preserved and put into the Veterans Museum in the capital of Madison, Wisconsin. But they'll have a fire there on March 26th of 1881, and Old Abe is destroyed. They'll make a replica of him, and he is still standing today, and he overlooks the speaker's podium in the assembly of the Capitol building. Here you can get a better picture of what this park looks like. There are many different cannons located throughout the park from the Civil War. You can see the photo here in the middle of Old Abe with his 8th Infantry Battalion, and atop the memorial. And the bottom center photo, you can see he stands today overlooking the speaker's podium in the assembly chambers of the Capitol. On the left is our young soldier marching off to war, and the date there is 1861 to 1865. And on the right is our veteran soldier returning from the war. And the date there is the dedication of this memorial, 1912. Well, the very first football game to be played at Camp Randall occurs on September 30th of 1895, in which the UW football team will defeat the Iowa Agriculture and Model Farm 28-6. And I assume that is today's Iowa University. In 1914, this stadium only has wood bleachers that could seat as many as 3,000, but they'll have crowds of up to 15,000 attending these football games. In 1915, the state will give the university $20,000 to build a stadium. On November 20th of 1915, at a homecoming game against Minnesota, a portion of these bleachers will collapse, sending 1,800 people tumbling to the ground. None of them are seriously injured, but to add injury to insult, Minnesota will win that game, 21-0. In 1917, they will pour the very first concrete section of the bowl of the stadium. And this begins the construction of Camp Randall that we know today. And on October 6th of 1917, they will play and defeat Beloit College, 34-0. I didn't know Beloit College had a football team at that time. But Beloit College goes way back, almost as far as the UW-Madison. They'll dedicate this stadium on November 3rd of 1917. And again, they will play a homecoming game against Minnesota, and they have better luck this time, winning the game 10-7. You're going to find out that many of the iconic things that happen at the Camp Randall Stadium happen either against the University of Iowa or the University of Minnesota. Wisconsin and Minnesota have the longest running rivalry in the NCAA. And I believe it is either a tied record, or I think Minnesota might be up 1 now. So we have more battles to play and have against the University of Minnesota. The construction of this first portion of the stadium is $17,000. They'll now add more concrete seating, adding another 7,500 seats. And along with the wood bleachers, they can seat up to 12,000 and maybe as many as 20,000. The team will only have 23 players at this time in 1917, because the rest of them are either in the military preparing for war or off fighting the war during World War I. In 1921, they'll add another 4,000 seats and expand that concrete bowl. On June 8th of 1922, the remaining wood bleachers will burn to the ground, and they will never have wood bleachers again. In 1940, they will add more additional seating and student dorms to the stadium. 1951, they'll add another 10,000 seats in offices. 1958, they'll lower the field 10 feet, allowing for another 10,000 seats. 1966, they'll put in an upper deck and a press box. 2001 to 2005, they will add luxury box structures, a 5-story office building, and upgrades for a cost of $110 million. 2013, they'll upgrade the scoreboard. 2018 to 22, they'll upgrade the south end zone and seating. And in 2023, they will add a heated playing field, which becomes very important when you're playing games late in November and early December. The largest crowd to ever attend a football game at Camp Randall occurs on November 12th of 2005, again versus Iowa, with a total of 81,184 in attendance. The current seating of the stadium is just a little over 76,000. When they make these modifications and additions, they actually ended up reducing the seating to put in some of those features. Camp Randall is the 41st largest stadium in the world, and it's the 7th largest in the Big Ten. It used to be the 5th, but when we added the University of Washington and UCLA to the Big Ten, they each seat over 100,000, bumping us to 7th. You would think for college professors and students, they would be able to do better mathematics. The Big Ten now consists of 18 teams. And they're actually talking about adding 2 more. They're also talking about the Big Ten removing itself from the NCAA. And I would assume the purpose for that is for revenue, because now they can dictate how the revenue will be raised and divided amongst the teams in the Big Ten. It is the oldest stadium in the Big Ten and the 5th oldest college stadium in the U.S. Hard to believe there are 4 others that are actually older than Camp Randall and still in use. I'm going to mention the UW Fieldhouse, which sits right on the south end of Camp Randall. But the Fieldhouse is not considered to be part of Camp Randall. I don't understand the logic there, but it is historic in itself. It was built in 1930 to replace the Red Gym. The Red Gym still exists today, but it is repurposed for other uses. When I went to graduate school at Madison, you would go to the Red Gym to register. It was very chaotic. And you'd come in the front door, go up the steps, and when you got done, you went down a rickety fire escape out of the back door. I was always worried that fire escape was going to fall off the building. That stadium will seat 8,000. In 1936, it was expanded to 12,000 seats, and it would be the home of the UW Badger basketball team until 1998, when they moved to the Kohl Center. The Kohl Center will seat over 17,000 and is the 4th largest basketball stadium in the Big Ten. Today, it is currently used by the UW women's volleyball team and the men's wrestling team. And if we talk about the Fieldhouse, we have to talk about perhaps the most awarded basketball player in the history of Camp Randall or the UW, and that's Frank Kaminsky. He's the 2014 NCAA Tournament Most Outstanding Player. 2014-2015, he's first team All Big Ten. In 2015, he wins all of these awards: the John Wooden Award, the Oscar Robertson Trophy, the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Award, and the Big Ten Player of the Year. And in 2015, he's the Associated Press Basketball Player of the Year, the only Badger to have ever won that honor. He will go on to play for several different teams in the NBA. He's still playing today for a team in Japan. Well, when we talk about the UW and Camp Randall, we have to talk about the iconic figure Camp Bucky Badger. Bucky Badger goes all the way back to the 1890s when they actually used the live badger. But the problem with that was he would bite people and run away. So he didn't last as a mascot for very long. The name Bucky or Badger does not come from the animal, however. The name Badger comes from the lead miners of Wisconsin that would operate and dig in the mines in the southwest portion of Wisconsin, kind of in the Belmont, Platteville, Mineral Point area. And during the winter, they would dig tunnels into the side of the hill, and they'd go in and out of these tunnels, and they were referred to as badgers. He first appears in a cartoon in 1930. He's officially adopted as a mascot in October of 1940, and he was designed by artist Art Evans. The very first costume badger appears in 1949 homecoming game, and that was created as a papier-mâché head created by a student, Carolyn Conrad, and the very first one to dress in this costume is gymnast cheerleader Bill Sagal. Bucky Badger actually has an official name, and if you will often hear this as a trivia question, what is Bucky's name? And they have a contest, and the winning name is Buckingham U. Badger. Of course, we all know him today as simply Bucky. He wears the traditional cardinal and red sweater, cardinal and white sweater. In 2003, they changed the logo to what we call the wave, the W wave, for a more modern look. The Bucky is portrayed by as many as 7 different students. They undergo a selection process and rigorous training. If you go to a Badger football game, you may see Bucky leave the stadium at the end of the first quarter, and as soon as he leaves, another one comes in. And you can imagine wearing this costume in an 85-degree afternoon football game, that it gets quite warm and tiring in this costume, and they will exchange. And in many cases, they may have multiple engagements, so we need more than one Bucky at a time. In 2006, he was inducted into the Mascot Hall of Fame, and he remains the beloved mascot of the UW University. Let's look at Bucky, how he's changed over the years. Here he is in 1949 as a papier-mâché head, and you can see how he's changed over the years. And this is what he looks like today. I think my favorite one was the one in the upper right-hand corner, but that's changed over the years. Well, Wisconsin has had 2 Heisman Trophy winners. The very first was Alan Amici in 1954. He's an All-American in 52, 53, 54. In 1954, he wins the Silver Football Award, the top player in the Big Ten. He joins the Wisconsin Athletic Hall of Fame in 1967, the College Football Hall of Fame in 1975, the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame in 2004, and he's the NFL Rookie of the Year in 1955. And he will play in the pros from 1955 to 1960. Our second Heisman Trophy winner is perhaps the most decorated UW football player in the history of the UW, and that's Ron Dayne. He's an All-American from 1996 to 1999. 1996 Big Ten Co-Freshman Player of the Year. In 1999, he wins all of the following awards: the Maxwell Award, the Walter Camp Award, the Doak Walker Award, the Jim Brown Award, the AP College Player of the Year, and the Sports News Player of the Year. And in addition to that, he wins the Big Ten Most Valuable Player Award, the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Award, and in 2000, he's the Big Ten Male Athlete of the Year. And he will play in the pros from 2000 to 2007 for the New York Giants. The UW has 5 retired jerseys. The first is Ellen Amici, number 35 in 2000, and Ron Dane, number 33 in 2007. We just talked about them. These are the 2 Heisman Trophy winners. And then we have Dave Schreiner, number 80 in the 1950s, Alan Schaefer, 83 in 1944, and Pat Richter, 88 in 2006. You all are probably familiar with Pat Richter. He was a wide receiver for the Badgers. He'll go on to play in the pros. He will return to the UW, and he'll be the athletic director for many years. Dave Schreiner. He was a wide receiver. He was an All-American for 2 years. He was the Big Ten Player of the Year in the early 1950s, actually 1940s. In 1943, he would join the Marines, and he would go off and fight in World War II. And he will be killed in the Battle of Okinawa. And because of his dedication to the UW football team and his service to the country, his jersey was retired in the early 1950s. The other one is Alan Schaefer, and I'd never heard of this individual. And it turns out that Alan Schaefer actually grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and he played at Madison West High School. Now just try and envision this transition. When he plays at the high school, he is a center. At the age of 17, he goes to the UW and he joins the Badger football team, and he's the starting quarterback. You would never see that transition today, somebody going from center to quarterback. And in fact, he's even the captain of the team. During a football game against the University of Iowa, he is the lead blocker. And again, we wouldn't see that today, for the running back. And he has a collision with the defensive lineman, and he collapses to the field. They help escort him to the sideline, where he again collapses. An ambulance is called, and he's taken to Madison General Hospital, and he dies from hemorrhaging of the lungs. The only player, Badger football player, to have died at a football game. And he is honored with the retirement of his jersey, and his name is on the facade of Camp Randall. UW has had 4 players in the NF Hall of Fame. The first is Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch. He gets this moniker from a sports writer in Chicago who says, when you watch a football game and Elroy catches a pass and runs down the field, his legs are going in 6 different directions at one time. He calls them crazy legs. Elroy likes this moniker because he hates the name Elroy. I was not aware of the fact that Elroy actually was raised in Wausau, Wisconsin. He comes to the UW, and he plays here in 1942 for only 1 year. In 1943, he joins the Marines, and the Marines will station him at the University of Michigan. And he'll play for Michigan for 1 year. But in his time at the University of Michigan, he will letter in 4 sports: football, basketball, baseball, and track. Following the 1943 season, he will now put in his military service. He will never go overseas and fight in the war, and he will be released from the military in 1946, and he'll go to play in the pros from 1946 to 1957, and he will enter the Hall of Fame in 1968. Then we have Mike Webster from Tomahawk. He plays for the UW from 1971 to 1973. He plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers from 1974 to 1990. He enters the Hall in 1997. Mike Webster has passed away, and he will suffer brain injury from his pro career. Then we have Joe Thomas from Brookfield. He plays at the UW from 2003 to 2006. He will play for the Cleveland Indians from 2007 to 2018. He enters the Hall of Fame in 2023. If you Watch Joe Thomas when he played for the Cleveland Indians and you see Joe Thomas today, you'll think you lost half of a person. He's lost a significant amount of weight because he said, I don't have to eat multiple times a day to maintain my weight any longer. The last member from the Badgers in the NF Hall of Fame is Arnie Herber. Never heard of him. Anybody here ever heard of Arnie Herber? Usually I find maybe one person. Arnie Herber grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He'll play for the Badgers for 1 year in 1928. In 1929, he'll play for some university in Colorado. He will then go to play in the pros from 1930 to 1940 for the Green Bay Packers. How wonderful is that to be able to play for your own home team? And he is said to have revolutionized the passing game of the NFL. And he enters the Hall of Fame under the category called Vintage NFL Players in 1966. I mentioned Rufus Ferguson here. He's known as the Road Runner. In 1971, he's the first 1,000-yard rusher for the Badgers in the regular season. And he does what is called the Rufus Shuffle whenever he scores a touchdown. He wasn't very big. He's 5'6", weighs 190 pounds. He was the first team Big Ten in 71-72. He was drafted 16th round of the Atlanta Falcons in 1973. And I don't know how long he played there, and then he'll play in two other leagues, the CFL and the WFL. There's some controversy here. We mentioned he's the first 1,000-yard rusher in the regular season. The UW credits Billy Merrick as being the first 1,000-yard rusher, but they included post-season games or tournament games after the regular season to get that 1,000 yards. He'll have a grandson that not too long ago will play for high school in Milwaukee and then go on to play college football as well. When we talk about legendary figures associated with Camp Randall, we have to talk about Mike LeCrone. Mike LeCrone will get his bachelor's degree and master's at the University of Butler and his PhD at the University of Indiana. He will then become the marching band director of his home school, Butler University. He'll be hired as the UW marching band director in 1969. This is not a time to come to Wisconsin to be a band director. Wisconsin has suffered a 22-game losing streak. Morale is low. Attendance is low. Nobody wants to go to these games. And there's chaos on campus. He even has a difficult time getting people interested to be part of the marching band. But he will build this marching band. He'll have 150 members to this band. When they perform with 120 marching members. In 1975, he starts the marching band annual spring concert. That very first concert draws around 450. But by the time he's ready to retire, they will hold this concert over a 3-day period and attract as many as 25,000. Any of you ever gone to one of these concerts? Yeah, they're fantastic. But you better have earmuffs on because they're also very, very loud. Well, he was a conductor, an arranger, a composer, and a performer. And again, if you've ever gone to any of these spring concerts, you know how he performs. And you'll see some of those here in just a minute. He will be the longest marching band director in the Big Ten, serving as the director for 50 years. The next closest one was the retired marching band of Michigan State, who served in that position for 40 years. He retired in 2019 at the age of 82. He's still around. He's still conducting bands. They have a weekly gathering of former marching band members and others, and he's the director of that band. He does presentations, and if you ever get an opportunity to listen to one of his presentations, they're very engaging and quite humorous, and I would recommend that you do. Here's what Mike Leckrone has looked like over the years. From 1971, 2 years after he starts, to 2017, the year before he retires. And as you look at these pictures from 1971 to 2017, he hasn't changed at all, other than his hair got more white. Well, during his years at the UW, he's known for his many antics and his performances. Let's look at some of those. And it's playing my music. I'm not hearing my music, so that's all right. Here he is. There's my music. This is On Wisconsin, played by the UW Badger Band. Here he is, entering the annual spring concert high above the crowd on this motorcycle. He's some 20 feet or more up in the air, coming into the arena. Here he is doing the Beer Barrel Polka in the 5th quarter following a football game. Again, he's entering high above the crowd at the concert. Now remember, when he's doing these antics, he's in his late 70s, early 80s, and he's doing this. I'd be paranoid at my age to be up there. Even at half of my age, I'd be paranoid up there. Here he is leading the band either during the football game or during the 5th quarter. Here he is with one of his outrageous costumes that he wears during the spring concert. And he's known for these costumes and changes them throughout the concert, as many as 12 to 20 times. Here he is entering Camp Randall on an elephant. And he tells the story that this elephant left a very large deposit on the 50-yard line. Here he is again in one of his many costumes that you see him during the concert. And of course, if we have Mike Leckrone, we have to have a Mike Leckrone bobblehead. Well, another thing that is a tradition is Camp Randall Jump Around. This was first played on October 10th of 1998 at the homecoming game versus Purdue and Drew Brees. It was on the stadium playlist. They'll play music during breaks and interruption during the game. This song is called Jump Around, and it's performed by a group known as the House of Pains. It was released in 1989 and became popular and a hit in 1992. This is always done at the end of the 3rd quarter. They'll play this song, and everybody in the stands is jumping up and down. And included in that are all the players on the football team, even from the opposing team. Everybody gets involved in this jump around. They'll go on to win that game against Purdue 34-28. In 2003, without notifying the fans, they canceled this tradition because they were doing renovations or building the upper stadium, and they were concerned this motion and movement could create damage. This creates an uproar when the fans lose this tradition, and they immediately get the engineers out the next day to do a study. And by the end of the week, they assured the university that there will be no damage or concern with this tradition, and it is immediately put back into place the next week. The USA Today referred to this as one of the best college sports traditions in college football. It is done at other universities, but it is Wisconsin that is known for this tradition of jump around. Another tradition is the tuba band march. This starts in 1950, and this immediately follows Jump Around. The tubas will come out of the band section of the stadium. They'll line up single file and march around the interior of the field playing music and Badger songs. And when they get done, they finish in the front of the band again. And I don't know if there's a whole song that goes to this, but the very last song of that verse of that song is, "The finest fellows throughout the land are tubas in the Wisconsin band." They have quite a tradition. However, Elroy Hirsch creates a problem. In 1971, he cancels this tradition, again, without letting the fans know this is going to happen. And the reason he does this, in 1971, again, the Badgers do not have a very good football team. And he feels that the tuba march is distracting from the game. And so he cancels this tradition. Again, it creates an uproar. They'll get as many as 2,500 signatures on a petition to restore this tradition. At the end of that season, he'll go to the 1971 band concert. He'll march in carrying a tuba, attempting to play on Wisconsin, which he can't do. And he'll admit that he made a mistake, and they'll reinstitute this tradition at the beginning of the season in 1972. Another tradition of Camp Randall is the fifth quarter. What you're hearing here is the beer barrel polka. The fifth quarter is performed after every game, whether they win or they lose. This started back in 1977, and it became officially adopted in 1978. And many times during those seasons when they didn't have very good seasons, you may have actually seen more people sticking around for the fifth quarter than that were there for the game. They play many of the traditional songs, and the fans get involved with things like waving during varsity, doing the chicken dance and the beer barrel polka, and others. These photos that you see here, this will be Mike Lacrone's very last fifth quarter in November 26th of 2018. Probably a pretty sad day for many of those band members and maybe for Mike Lacrone himself. Well, where does the saying that you probably have heard many, many times, "on Wisconsin," come from? It has nothing to do with football. It actually goes all the way back to November 23rd of 1863, during the Civil War, at a battle of Mission Ridge in Chattanooga, Tennessee. 18-year-old adjunct Arthur MacArthur is at the base of this hill, and the mission of the Union forces are to capture this hill and ridge and hold it for the Union Army. And he's holding the Wisconsin flag. And as he gets ready to charge up this hill, he looks back at his fellow soldiers and he yells, "On Wisconsin!" And he charges up the hill, followed by the rest of the infantry. And they will indeed capture and hold this ridge. It's interesting. He'll actually receive a Medal of Honor for his service during the Civil War. The Medal of Honor is the highest military award given for service and valor in the military. And the very first Medal of Honor awards are given in the Civil War. His grandson will be General MacArthur. Interestingly enough, he has a son, and his son's name is Arthur MacArthur, Jr. He'll have a grandson by the name of General Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur will have a son by the name of Arthur MacArthur IV. Obviously, they really like that name. Well, where does the song "On Wisconsin" come from? It originates in 1909 by William Purdy, who is writing this melody for a fight song competition for the University of Minnesota. His former roommate, Carl Beck, will say, no, no, don't enter that into a contest for Minnesota, and he changes the wording. The original song was to start out, Minnesota, Minnesota, and continue on. And Carl Beck will change this to on, Wisconsin, and continue on. It'll be sung the very first time at Camp Randall on November 13th of 1909 against Minnesota. How appropriate, since it was meant to be for them. This will then become the fight song for the UW. This song is in public domain, and as many as 18 universities use this, some version of this as their fight song, and as many as 2,500 high schools use some version of this. After one of my presentations, a woman came up to me and started singing her high school fight song, and she said, now I know where it came from. Don't ask me what my fight song was at our high school. In 1913, legislators Judge Charles Rosa and J.S. Huber will rewrite the wording here for a state song. I didn't know we had a state song. We have a state bird, a state flower, we may as well have a state song. And this will actually become part of law in 1959 and established as the state song, and it will be signed into legislation by Governor Gaylord Nelson on July 7th of 1959. I worked at the state of Wisconsin for 34 years. I went to all over the state for court, for training, for many other functions. I have never heard this song sung. I didn't even know we had one. I'm sure at some state functions it gets sung, but the only time I've ever heard it was in my research. I found a YouTube version of a group singing this song. Well, on the right here is the State on Wisconsin song. I'm not a singer, so I'm simply going to read this for you. It goes, on Wisconsin, grand old Badger State. We, thy loyal sons and daughters, hail thee good and great. On Wisconsin, champion of the right. Forward our motto, God will give thee might. The next time you go to a state function, ask them to sing this song for you. My guess is they'll have no idea what you are talking about. On the left is the UW fight song on Wisconsin. Again, I'm not a singer. We'll let somebody else sing it for me. Feel free to join in.
On Wisconsin, plunge right through that line. Run the ball clear down the field, a touchdown sure this time.
At the game you go rah, rah, rah.
On Wisconsin, fight on for her fame. Fight, fellows, fight, we'll win this game. On Wisconsin, stand up, Badgers, sing. Forward is our driving spirit, loyal voices ring. On Wisconsin, raise her glowing flame. Stand, fellows, let us now salute her name.
There's actually a third verse to this song, but you rarely ever hear it sung. During the game, they only sing the first two verses. Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation in the history of Camp Randall, but we need to end again with a tradition. So, let's begin with the wave. So we've got our wave. And of course, we have to have our favorite song, which is You've Said It All. So let's hear our song. again as performed by the UW Marching Band. In summary, this ground that we call Camp Randall is named after the then Governor Alexander Randall, who will muster the troops to these grounds in preparation to march off to fight in the Civil War. Following the Civil War, this land will be purchased by the state of Wisconsin and immediately deeded to the University of Wisconsin. This will become the grounds of the athletic ground for the university, including the football team, the baseball team. The Badgers will play their very first football game on these grounds in 1895. And in 1917, they'll begin to pour the first portion of the concrete bowl of this stadium, iconic stadium that we call today Camp Randall. And this name, Camp Randall, is there in honor of those Union soldiers who fought in the Civil War. That gives you a brief summary, an overview of the history of Camp Randall. And if we catch this right, we'll see if we can say, if you can all join in and say, you've said it all. There you go. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of this presentation. Anytime you may be traveling out of the state of Wisconsin and somebody says to you, where are you from? Be sure you say, on Wisconsin, because if you do, you indeed have said it all. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you found it informative and entertaining. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to address those for you. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today, and thank you, Bob.